Hey, Ray.
How you doing there, Wes?
Not too bad at all, thanks. Not too bad at all.
So who else is Jackie on here yet, or
Haven't seen her come in yet.
no? Okay, we'll get started pretty soon, anyways. 4 minutes.
Yeah,
So how was the weekend?
it was good. Yeah, we had one of my granddaughters had her birthday party, and it involved multiple sleepovers of multiple grandkids at our house. So by
Oh,
the
there you
time
go.
by the time yesterday afternoon came over, my wife was exhausted. I was exhausted, and we had a good time, but it was good to see him go home.
How many grandchildren do you have in total?
5.
Oh, wow. Geez, you got a lot. Wow.
Yeah, no, we're feeling fairly blessed. My son's
For
got
sure.
3, 2 boys and a girl, and so 4, 6, and 9. And my daughter has a boy and a girl, and 2 and 5.
Oh, wow. Geez, oh, that's got it going on then, for sure.
Yeah, so well, they're all so close together that we have to remember that they're 4, 5, 6, and 9, uh,
Yeah.
and and so there's a lot of drama at that age, right?
Oh, totally. Totally. Like I said, I don't miss it. I can understand exactly what you mean by it's good to send them home at the end. There's a lot of drama, lots of crying.
Yeah, yeah, no,
Crying from sun up till sunset.
yeah, no, it's all good.
Somebody's always, at least with my kids, that's how it was. Somebody was always getting bopped, or somebody was always not happy about something,
Oh, yeah,
and somebody was fighting with somebody.
well, and they all run hard and stuff like that, and there's always some collision happening
Oh yeah,
somewhere.
yeah. That's the other thing. Yeah, accidents. I remember Kyle when Kyle was a little kid. He had stitches like 3 times before he was 4.
Yeah, yeah.
Popping off stuff and hitting his head on things and falling over in the chair, and yeah, it was crazy.
Mayor Heron, you're noted as being absent, but I'm not sure how that plays in terms of the minutes because you showed up at 1:31 last time. I don't think you're absent because you're a minute late. So I'm wondering if we need to amend that.
You're muted.
If in fact the mayor showed up at 1:31 at the last meeting, stayed the rest of the meeting, then I agree completely. It is misleading at best to call her absent. Normally one would put her name down and then note the time that she arrived.
Yeah. Well, maybe if it's okay then with you, Mr. Chair, I'll make that amendment to the minutes when it comes up. I mean, you're noted as a rise. Sorry, I didn't hear you, Kathy.
I think it should just say, present, but and then the arrival time in brackets beside.
Yeah.
Because that happens a lot. And then if people are checking, they wouldn't scroll through the whole minutes to see if you showed up later, right?
Right.
Yeah. Thanks, Wes.
Okay. No worries.
And I'm early today.
That will not be noted in the minutes.
We almost got a full council here.
How did the meeting go this morning?
It was really productive, I thought.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're ready to go. It's 1:30. Attendance at the beginning of the meeting is Councillor Hanson, Broadhead, and Watkins, and we also have Madam Mayor Heron and Councillor Mackay. You and I did make a mistake once in a while.
You just muted yourself, Ray.
Okay, so we call the meeting to order. Adoption of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? Can we have a mover to move the agenda as adopted? Councillor Hanson. I don't think we need to vote on that, right? Down to appointments. I don't believe there are any. Number 4. We're now on to 5, approval of the minutes. Councillor Broadhead, you had a change to the minutes?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Certainly would just like to note that Mayor Herron was in attendance. She arrived at 1:31. Just to note that in the attendance record.
Okay, so I guess as Mr. LaFleur was saying, we'll amend the minutes to have her as present and just put her time aside there, arrival time, or just put her as present. I'm fine with either.
Well, then with your concurrence, then, Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that the Community Growth and Infrastructure Standing Committee minutes of August 24th, 2020 be adopted as amended.
Okay, so moved. Is there any discussion? Mr. LaFleur, do you have something to say?
Yeah, I was just going to point out that when minutes are done, sometimes it will happen. I think we're all aware of it. A council member will not be present at the beginning of the meeting, and they will show up maybe 15 minutes, half an hour later. Then it would be quite appropriate at that part of the minutes to say absent at the beginning. But I feel that, if a council member shows up literally like 1 minute late, to all intents and purposes, they really weren't there. Sorry, they really weren't absent because they were there for all of the business, right? So that's the reason why I have no problem with changing it here. But I just pointing out that don't be surprised if in the future, if someone arrives 15, 20 minutes late, they still would be shown as absent at the beginning of the meeting. And then later on in the minutes, it would be indicated that they arrived at such and such time.
So due to the fact that we have a minute here, why don't we just put Mayor Herron as present?
That's what I'm suggesting.
Not even put 1:31 or anything behind it. Just
that makes perfect sense.
okay. So we have that motion. Councillor Hanson.
Not only that, we knew she was coming. I was chairing that meeting and I must have said about 3 times, I'm sure she's going to be here like momentarily. And
Okay.
everybody was saying, yeah, she's on her way. She's on her way. So yeah.
I'm just gonna blame it. It took that long to log in. That's what I'll say. It's slow internet.
With technology, that's kind of the truth too. So I think we should probably give everybody a little wiggle room on that.
Yeah, we'll cut everybody a minute or 2 slack. From
Yeah. Okay. So we'll just put her present. Councillor Broadhead, do you have anything else to close?
Nothing further.
Okay. Call for the vote. Those in favor? That's unanimous. 4-0. We are on to the next item, which is new business. I think, hang on here. And it's the capital prioritization matrix. Diane McMorty.
Good afternoon, committee members. So we just thought we would take the opportunity to bring back our capital prioritization matrix. So as you may recall, during 2018, we took the opportunity, sort of saw the need for some a decision-making tool that would help guide administration, as well as help council in terms of deciding which capital projects should be supported with funding. So for the 2019 year was the first year that we used the capital prioritization matrix, and we learned a lot from it. And so we took the next year to do some revisions out of it, some of the stuff that we had learned through that first go around, and made some revisions to the template. And so for the 2021 upcoming budget, we will be utilizing the same prioritization matrix. We didn't make any further changes to it. We're fairly happy with how it's working. But we just thought we'd take the opportunity first to just kind of go through, just to remind council or committee kind of sort of what the categories and the weightings are, and a bit of the process that we go through to get there. So I'm just going to share my screen here, just have a short presentation. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, so the prioritization matrix is, the plan is to sort of balance many of the different factors that, should potentially weigh into how much priority one project should be given over top of another. So we've come up with 6 or 7 different categories and given them what we feel are appropriate weightings. So the first section that we go through for every capital project is a health and safety component. So this is made up of 2 components. So one is about reduces the impact or hazard to public health or safety of the community. And the second one is related to environmental protection and addresses environmental impact. So as you can see in this section on the right-hand side, it kind of shows what the choices are and how many points you get for meeting one of those categories. We do have a for our administrative staff and our directors and project owners, we do have another document that provides more insight into sort of what do we mean by event likely, event severe. So we've come up with some sort of examples and how, what should be kind of coded in each one. Each director and the prioritization committee is also required to provide sort of a little bit of commentary on why they chose the specific one that they did, so that we can make sure that we have consistency in ratings among our projects. So this particular category, again, this one's a little bit different. It's kind of between these two. It's a total of 25 points, so it's weighted 75% towards the safety component and 25% towards the environmental protection. The next section is around priorities. So we ask people to see whether it links to a defined council strategy or priority. So we have all of the strategic plan sort of linked to this document, so people can go through and sort of search the council priorities and the corporate business plan and show where there's linkages. And then we also need to know whether the project is supported or required by any kind of a bylaw, council policy, or any specific provincial or federal legislation. So the next category is around service levels and services due to growth. So this overall category is worth 40 points. The components, as you can see, is does it help to maintain a service level that's currently approved by council? That obviously gets a fairly high component to it. We want to know the geographic or the population served. So is it a project that only benefits a small component of the community, or is it a community-wide type of initiative? As well as also the frequency or availability of a particular asset. So is it something that's available to the public all year round, or is it seasonally based, so it's only available for a couple of months of the year? Does it improve recreational and cultural opportunities? That's kind of a yes or no. Does it support non-residential attraction and retention? So of course that should get some significant points as well, since that's a high goal of council. And then if it's increasing a service in the community, is it an expansion of an existing service, or is it a brand new service that's currently not offered? So the rationale behind this is that the expansion of an existing service should probably get a little bit, it's not a high weighted category, but should get a little bit more points than adding a brand new service. And the thought behind that is that, we're likely already skilled in that area in terms of operating and what we can expect versus bringing in a brand new service. And then the last two sections, one is on project commitment. So this is what stage is the project at? So is it in pre-design, design, or construction? Obviously, the farther down you get the road to that, you're committing more to it. So it should get a little bit of priority. And then what's the public participation or input level to date? So it recognizes the fact that if there's been a large amount of public engagement already on a project, there's probably a little level of expectation in the community that the project proceed. So it's going to get a bit higher points if there's been a fair bit of public participation. And then one of the major categories actually that we changed from the very first year is we added this segment on payback, return on investment, or whether there's specialized grants. So as you can see on the payback or ROI section, it's really based on what does the payback timeline look like. So obviously it gets more points if it has a direct payback within 5 years, then 5 to 10 years, and 10 years plus. And then if there's any specialized grants, so this wouldn't be grants like your MSI or your federal gas tax. These would be grants that are specific. Maybe it was a specific recreation grant that we maybe were likely to get. It would get some points kind of in that category. So that's kind of the end of the prioritization matrix. Like I said, we haven't changed it from last year. Just wanted an opportunity for council just to kind of remind you of what it was. We do have a fairly robust process that we use in administration to go through this. So starting last year, what we did was we set up a capital prioritization committee, which consists of engineering, finance, and capital projects offices as the three main department heads. And then we have each director come in to discuss their projects. And we also bring in another director to kind of act as an impartial third party. And the goal of having all of those different people kind of together is that we all come from different backgrounds and perspectives. And so we were able to have really good discussion and sort of decide on what the points were in each category. And then I think the directors felt, they had an opportunity to explain their project, and everybody kind of bought into the final scores. So it was a good process. This year, due to COVID, and plus we spent a lot of time doing that last year, and most of the projects are obviously have carried forward from prior years. So we didn't go through that full process again, but we did, our committee just took the opportunity to go through all of them, make sure that none of the points assigned to a project should have changed potentially, obviously given COVID and everything that's changed. We just wanted to make sure that there wasn't a need to change any of the points. We did make some minor adjustments on a few, but for the most part, they stayed pretty similar to last year. I guess I could either take questions now or I can kind of continue on. There's kind of a second component to this presentation that I wanted to do. So I kind of wanted to take this opportunity. So while we, did this capital prioritization matrix, and it's providing a lot of insight and, a little bit of sort of data-based or consideration of what should be considered, we've also recognized that we're facing some challenges. And I think it's we've been talking internally about the fact that we should be maybe taking the next step in our capital planning, and we've kind of had some really high level ideas, but we just wanted to have the opportunity to let council know what we were thinking, and whether you'd be supportive of us kind of going down this road in the next year to kind of start looking at that future year's capital planning. So some of the questions that we were kind of wanting to just pose to council is, should we look at a longer term funding strategy for capital? Like looking at more of a 5-year or even a council term, a 4-year plan. We don't have any preconceived notions. I'd like to get a kind of a cross-functional team together and start discussing potential options that we could present to council to see where we'd get your buy-in, but just want a sense of if there's something on this list that's, you don't even want us to touch. I'd kind of rather like to know that now. But if you're supportive of us going forward, that's what we kind of want to plan to do in the next. So in terms of a longer term funding strategy, as I've kind of listed here, that some of the challenges that we face when we're doing an annual approval of capital is that obviously it's very short-term focus. It hinders alternative procurement strategies like a design build. We're doing it one piece at a time. So we're getting approval only for the design phase in 1 year, and then we have to wait to the next year to see if the construction phase kind of meets the cut, and it makes it difficult for planning. And certainly on the finance side, we're trying to look long-term, and we're playing a little bit of the financial puzzle game when it comes to capital. We've got, different kinds of grants with different criteria in terms of what qualifies for them. Obviously, there's, options for utilizing debt. We have our pay-as-you-go funding, and it's a little bit of a puzzle game all the time. And if we could take a little bit of a longer-term view on that, it would certainly be helpful in making sure that we're utilizing those funding sources to the best of our ability. The other thing with the annual approval of capital is it does create challenges in planning internal resources. And again, I'm talking more about the growth capital. RMR, we pretty much know what our RMR needs are on an annual basis, but it's difficult on the growth side, for capital projects office, engineering, just purchasing and trying to manage their internal resources without even understanding what projects are potentially on the horizon. So again, should we limit the unfunded portion of our capital plan? So in the next 5 years alone in our 10-year capital growth plan, we have about $143 million worth of growth projects, and we have an estimate of about $40 million in funding. So we've got a pretty significant gap there. I know we've had a process over the last couple of years where we've kind of come to council and asked for, or committee, and asked whether we should be taking things off the 10-year plan, and we have removed a few things, but not a significant amount. So we're always in this boat where we're kind of showing a $200 million deficit over the 10 years. And I was just, spitballing that some of the benefits of potentially reducing our 10-year plan is to create realistic expectations in the community. I mean, with that kind of a funding gap, there's many projects on that 10-year plan that will likely never be able to see the light of day just because of a lack of funding, right? There's only so much money, and we're not going to be able to get to all of them. The other potential benefit to having less projects overall on our plan is creating efficiencies within administration and council. We spend a lot of time updating capital charters, obtaining new costing, putting all of those things together for the budget package every year. So it would definitely create some efficiencies from that perspective. I would certainly be supportive. I mean, I don't think we need to have a plan that's completely funded. I think it's always good to have somewhat of an unfunded portion, because you never know when, specialized grants could become available, and we want to be ready with some additional projects should funding become available. So one of the ideas that we were kind of talking around, and again, we don't really have any preconceived notions of how this would work, but we have an estimate of what our available funding is, for the next 5 years for sure. Should we be, so as the first point sort of talks there, so our current matrix, well, it's great and it provides valuable information. It very heavily leans towards projects that are related to emergency services and transportation, especially because of the safety impact, and some of those pieces. So if we talked about potentially finding a way to make sure that we're investing in all the different areas of the city, that concept of creating a complete community, a way to split that available funding over the next 5 years so that we know we're also investing in recreation and culture and environment and all of those pieces as well. Again, I put it there as a percentage. I don't know if that's where it would go. That was just a really high level idea, and certainly would be happy to hear council's comments towards any ideas that they might have on that, or whether you're supportive of this function at all. So one of the things that we find interesting is when we're working with executive leadership to put together the actual recommended capital for the year, we do sometimes take some of these other things into consideration over and above the score of the project. The score is great, and it certainly provides, like I would suggest, sort of the biggest contribution towards our recommendation, but we also know that there's other things that need to be considered outside that maybe don't get picked up in the matrix. And so right now we are doing that, but there aren't really goalposts, I guess, to guide that. And so if we could develop some policies and processes that would help us consider some of those other factors, that would be helpful as well. One of the other things we've talked about, and this is an interesting one, and I'd be interested to hear how council feels about this. So a lot of our planning documents that we do, like our MDP, our transportation master plans, we've been doing some area structure plans. So all of these things are not capital items, certainly from a strict accounting perspective. And we don't record them as capital. We do record them as operating expenses at the end of the year. But we've always in this organization funded them through our capital dollars. And I think the reason for that is more, it's easier in the fact that these are capital dollars are sort of one-time in nature, and these projects are one-time in nature, but they're really not capital. So one of the interesting things is a lot of these plans from the matrix perspective also don't score high at all. They score quite low based on those categories, because plans in themselves don't create recreational opportunities. They don't create, they have the potential for the capital that comes out of them at the end, but the plans themselves do not. So they score very low. And yet, I think everybody would agree, some of these key planning documents are key to driving the city and where we're going to go. So, I just put on here, one option may be that we start funding them through the operating budget, recognizing that we would probably have to build that pot up slowly over time. But if we had a sort of a bucket of money related to planning, then the executive leadership in any given year could plan how that money was going to be spent in terms of which plans. If we didn't need it all in one year, we could potentially carry it forward so that we had it when we knew we had a big plan coming up. So it would make it cleaner in the fact that it's, like I said, it's truly not capital. And yeah, we know we need to get these plans done. And then the last one that I was thinking of again is should the debt policy limits and some of the rules around the debt policy be revisited. You know, we're seem to be a lot more open to debt at this point, and understanding that it is a valuable financial tool if it's used properly. Our debt policy right now is quite restrictive, certainly quite restrictive compared to other municipalities of our size and larger. So I think it might be worth a review, but obviously we need to get council's thoughts as to, you know, where your comfort level lies with that. And then should we, you know, in the debt policy itself or within some of our processes, you know, should we have some criteria that projects should meet before we would even consider debt funding? So does it provide strategic value and support economic growth? Some of our offsite levy projects that we've looked at front-ending through debt, you know, are very strategic in nature. Is it a really long-term assets, and does that asset have high benefit to the overall community? Or again, is it very, you know, neighborhood based or something? So the thoughts were to sort of come up with maybe some criteria that we could use to evaluate that would help us make recommendations to council for projects that we might want to look at debt funding. Yeah, so I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen now. Yeah, so that was sort of the end of my presentation, and I'm just, like I said, I'm interested to certainly take any questions on the matrix itself, or if you have any comments in regards to any of those areas we talked about, and should we be pursuing them?
Yes, Councillor Hanson has a question. Go ahead, Councillor Hanson.
Thanks, Diane. That was a really good presentation. I mean, a lot of what you talked about here today, I think is really good, prudent financial advice in terms of planning. Like right, the first one, should we look at a longer term funding strategy? Well, probably, but what I don't think I like is a 4-year based on a political term.
Mm-hmm.
So I would ask you, is 3 years too short? Because if that sort of doesn't give you enough time, especially, yeah, like 5 years is fine with me if that is what works for administration and staff. So maybe you could just comment on that.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting. I mean, multi-year budgeting is not something that we've, you know, looked at seriously in this organization for a little while, and I'm certainly, you know, open to have that discussion with council and looking at overall multi-year budgeting and including operating as well. In terms of the timeline, certainly something longer than 1 year would be, anything better than 1 year would be beneficial, just because, like I said, a lot of our projects are sort of like design 1 year, build the next. And so if you had full commitment for that project, right from day one over that 2-year cycle, or some of them are over 3 years, that would certainly help the planning, and especially from an internal resourcing perspective. I guess the problem is if you go anything outside of 2 or 4, so if you went 3 or 5, you're always going to be crossing over a council term, which I don't know if that could cause challenges or not, or whether that's something we could work through. So if, you know, if council had approved a 3-year capital budget, but a new council came in that 3rd year, would that be problematic? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's where I was going with that. I think it's important to not make it political, actually, and to understand why each council makes decisions. So the new council coming in has the opportunity to understand why decisions were made without just changing it all up. So I think, and I would be looking at, I always think we should match to the provincial government where we can in terms of planning. Mm-hmm. And so I always think in my mind that that's 3, but maybe it's 5. So that would be my comments then. And then I would say, when we talked about the master plans, I guess I haven't been paying attention or something. I did not know that they were being funded out of the capital budget. So I do like the idea of having a separate fund for these plans and understanding what's ahead of us specifically and what we might need to save up for when we've got a big plan coming up. So I think that's a really good idea. And the last thing that we talked about, number 4, MDP transport, no, we were talking about, well, we just came through the service level planning matrix. Well, we've been doing that ongoing. One of the things that they had on the side was whether something was mandated by government. So things like EMS and roads, and there's a certain level of mandate by government. We have to do those things. And sometimes at the detriment of some of the other things that we like to do in our city. And I've always felt that those things, because they were number 4 in that matrix, they were mandated, they should be considered differently than the rest of what we need to deal with as a city, because we have no choice in making those things happen. We maybe don't have to do as much as the government asks, but we do have to have EMS services. We do have to have decent roadways, etc. And so I like where you're going with this. I think that we ought to look at what is a must and a have to because it's mandated, and what we need to be trying to achieve within our city limits to make our city a better place.
Mhm.
So it's very philosophical, I understand, but I do like where you're going with this.
Councillor Broadhead had some comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I do. And thanks, Councillor Hanson. Great comments. One of the things that you mentioned towards the end that I think is sort of fundamental to the building blocks of developing a sort of a long-term strategy around capital acquisitions and management is a review of our debt management policy. You said it's rather restrictive. I remember actually when we first came on council, Madam Mayor, there was a lot of talk about St. Albert being in the best financial health of similar sized communities in the province, simply because of our pay-as-you-go philosophy in terms of capital programming. And so a lot of development, if you will, didn't occur in a timely fashion simply because we had our debt management policy that constrained what we could do as a community. I believe it's time that we revisit our debt management policy so at least we understand what we're saying. To me, that's sort of foundational, or a foundational building block to where you want to go. Because if your debt management plan doesn't change or your policy doesn't change, then a lot of the opportunities that you may see in terms of long-term strategies, you may not be able to fund them in any case. So I like where you're going as well with your program here. And I think if you were to take council through a debt management policy review, to me, that's a sort of the first step in where you're wanting to go. Because when I looked at your presentation, the most interesting things to me were the questions that you asked going forward, because we had seen the matrix before, and it certainly provided some context around the decisions that you were making, and that's always helpful. And I think it's also prudent to be able to do that. But now the next step is okay. So if our matrix predisposes us to building roads and transportation infrastructure and those sorts of things, how do we service then the rest of the community? And so your question around, well, do we, take a percentage of our capital program and earmark it towards other things? I mean, those are questions that I think that council should wrestle with. And So I too like where you're going with this, but I think the first step maybe would be a debt management policy review. It's just my own personal thought.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions?
I'd just have a couple comments, Councillor Watkins.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Jolly.
So I'd agree with most of the comments. I feel like we have a workshop coming out of this. Is kind of what it sounds like. It sounds like there are a lot of great ideas around the table. Diane, all of those questions I think are important ones to ask, and I certainly wouldn't rule any of them out. I really liked the idea of kind of addressing the community focused kind of capital plan instead of having that heavy weight on those essential things, but just making sure that we're doing something that is balanced. And in terms of the longer term plan, again, I absolutely agree with that. I guess where I would disagree with Councillor Hanson just on one point is that having 4 years might be beneficial because ultimately, I mean, yes, in an ideal world, priorities will kind of roll over one council to the next, but we know that in practice, new council might have new priorities. They might not, but if they do have no new priorities, then it could mean that administration all of a sudden is dealing with say a 3-year or 5-year plan that's axed halfway through, and I would hate to see that happen. So I wouldn't rule that out at this point. So those are my only comments. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, I had a few questions and comments. I do support the longer term funding strategy. I do support limiting the unfunded portion of the capital plan. You know, it kind of seems ridiculous that we have such a large number for the unfunded portion. And on that, what would you have as a recommendation? You said that you know, we shouldn't have a plan that's fully capitalized or funded, but we shouldn't have probably such a large amount of unfunded projects. So what would you recommend if we have a capital plan of 100 million? What like percentage would you say would be unfunded? Or is there a recommendation that we're shooting for?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I have a recommendation at this point. Like I said, I'd kind of like to get a bit of a cross-functional team together to discuss it. But you know, I mean, I think it's important to have some projects ready for sure. You know, so something that's between maybe 25 and 50% versus 150% might be more reasonable. But I also get that it's very challenging to take some of those projects potentially off of the 10-year plan. That's a challenging job for council. So, you know, we'll have to find a way to help you guys do that and rationalize that if that's something you're interested in doing.
Mm-hmm. And then splitting the funding on a percentage basis. What would be the reasoning for that again? Would that be so that staff wouldn't have to guess where we want funds to go, or?
No, so the purpose behind that would be, so right now with the matrix, obviously, as we score all the projects, if we don't consider anything else, the ones that are always going to be at the top of the list and take up all of our funding are roads and emergency services. And so if that's the only thing we consider is the number on the matrix, we won't have money to put into recreation or culture or environment. So that the thought was, do you carve off a piece of funding specifically for recreation / culture, and then you prioritize within that smaller group? You know, as to what you would do over the next. And again, you know, when I threw out the percentage basis, that's just something kind of that was off the top of my head. There might be some other creative ways of looking at that. So that's what I kind of want my committee to start looking at.
Okay, and then the other question was, what criteria should we consider before debt funding is recommended? I support Councillor Broadhead. We should review the policy, and we should also look at the ability to finance this debt without significant tax increases on what we're going to use. And then secondly, you know, just are we below those debt thresholds that's laid out by the Municipal Government Act? So I'm sure you look at all that stuff. That's it. Those are my comments. So does anybody else have any other comments or questions? Councillor Broadhead?
Just thank you. One of the things that I was going through the report last night, Also noteworthy, a few surrounding municipalities have sought information around our matrix. I thought that was, it speaks to what we're doing here, but it also speaks to the idea of best practice within the region. Are there other communities that are doing stuff that we can learn from in terms of going and finding answers around the questions that you're posing?
Yeah, so that would be probably step one of what my committee would look at in terms of a project, is actually doing some best practice research. And I have to say, that's the one thing I love about working in municipal government, is other municipalities are usually quite happy to share information, as we are for them. So, if other people have implemented some things, they're usually quite happy to share their programs. And so that would be our intent, is to go out and see if other people are doing things along this realm that we could learn from.
Yeah, I always thought St. Albert punched well above its weight. And that speaks highly to the professionalism of the staff that we have on board. So congratulations in that regard. And thank you, Mr. Chair. That's my only final comment.
Councillor Hanson?
I have nothing further, but Councillor Mackay did have his hand up. I don't know if he's on your screen.
Councillor Mackay?
No problem. Actually, most of my comments were addressed in subsequent questions, but I guess just number 4, your question number 4, should required planning work be funded through a different source? Is there any lessons to learn from PBB, or is that more detailed into the actual, once the project's been identified, and to identify drivers? But would it give us some guidance?
I'm not 100% sure I'm understanding your question, because right now PBB pretty much focuses on operations as opposed to capital. So capital isn't managed at all. And because we don't do our planning stuff through, well, it's really that it's not funded. I mean, obviously it's our staff that are putting time into developing those plans, or even putting together RFPs for consultants to work on those plans. It's our staff time doing that. The actual funding for that project itself comes through the capital budget.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking from a high level whether or not there'd be anything, because PBB, as you know way better than I do, it identifies some of the drivers and it tries to assign more of the cost directly to specific operations. But maybe could we not adapt some of that over into capital, or no, it's not really designed to do that?
Actually, so that's something I've actually been contemplating with PBB for a while, and we've had discussions with our service provider over it. They're quite interested. It was never designed for that, but we were already having discussions about how could we use it for capital, because it really does make a lot of sense when you're, and we do attempt to do it in our matrix a little bit in terms of linking it to council strategic plan and all of those pieces. But if you remember in PBB, when council developed all of the community and the governance results, and they get scored based on that, I feel like there's opportunity to also score capital projects against those community results and against those governance results to help guide, where they fall in the priority, because those goals you guys have established all of those goals, and it would be good to use them. So we have had preliminary conversations with our PBB provider, ResourceX, of how we could potentially use this for capital in the future. I don't think it's probably in the next year, but it's definitely something we're thinking about and excited about how that could be integrated.
Yeah, I just kind of would, when you were asking the question, it just tweaked to me that perhaps there's something that we could do where we could actually cross it over, because that would also potentially answer your question number 2 around what's, we could limit some of them in relation to the actual numbers. We could bring down that number significantly if we could find some way of identifying the specific drivers as you identified. For number 3, all I see in relation to the comments around, we would probably need another matrix to determine that, right? So you'd end up needing another matrix to determine the weighting. So you'd be just stacking matrices onto another matrix. So I don't know how you're going to do that one. So anyways, those are my comments.
Councillor Hanson, did you have another comment or a question? See something?
I just put something in chat. If do we need a third motion to review our debt borrowing policy? Or is that encompassed in number 2?
But I would think we could actually just put that in, and Mr. Scoble can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we could just add that as an agenda item, like through agenda planning, when we're ready to bring that, as well as potential options with what the committee comes up with for council to a future committee meeting. We do normally have an annual review of financial policies. It's normally scheduled for the fall time. Right now, I'm not sure if we won't be able to get to the debt one this fall for sure. Might just be some small changes on other policies, but certainly by next year, or we could bring it earlier if we're ready by then.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure process-wise that we were on track.
Okay. Is there anybody willing to move the motion or the recommendation? Councillor Hanson.
Sure, that the Community Growth and Infrastructure Committee recommend to Council, number 1, that the capital prioritization matrix provided as an attachment to the September 14th, 2020 agenda report titled Capital Prioritization Matrix be received as information. And number 2, that by June 2021, CGISC is presented with options and recommendations for amendments to the capital planning and funding processes that support a long-term strategy for the future growth of the community.
Do you have any opening comments?
I think they've all been said. I think it's great that you guys are thinking like this. It's progressive and it's exactly the stuff that council should be looking at. So appreciate you bringing it forward.
Anyone else have any closing comments or debate? Okay, seeing none, we'll call for the vote. Those in favor? That is unanimous, 4-0. Okay, that's the last, the one and only item of business. So we'll have move for adjournment now. We are so adjourned.
Thank you.
Good job, everybody. That was-
Bye. Good job.
See you later.
Yeah, see you later.